Good morning. Thank you for tuning in to the live stream of First Baptist Church Cassville. My name is Zach Thomas, worship pastor here at First Baptist, and I just want to let you all know that this week's live stream is going to be a little bit different as James is out, and so we are taking the opportunity to replay a sermon that he preached on Father's Day. I think you will really enjoy this sermon as it is on the Prodigal Son. So continue watching and enjoy the sermon, and we will see you again next week.
God has been piecing this together in my mind for about the last 4 months. Today's Father's Day, and we're going to be preaching about the best father in the galaxy. And I'll guarantee you that none of us in this room are him. I've just been getting elements of this message. God's just been bringing them to me a piece at a time over the last probably 3 or 4 months, and then reinforcing them in other avenues. And it's been really an interesting process, but I'm anxious to bring this word to you. I'm convinced that the Bible is like an onion. You get an onion out of the bag, and the outside is all dry and flaky. And you start peeling that off to get down to the good meaty onion, and you can keep peeling layers off of that thing, and there's always another layer below. But if you peel off 2 or 3 layers and you put it back on the counter, that outside layer will start drying out and getting flaky again. Had a man in my office this week say, if he hears another sermon some point, it's not a direct quote, hear another sermon about the prodigal son, I think I'm going to throw up. And that's a shame, because you're going to hear a lot more about the prodigal son over the coming years, because there's so much in this parable. And so we're just going to keep peeling off layers. One of the writers that I have come on to recently, Dr. Kenneth Bailey, and this book is called Jacob and the Prodigal. And it's a comparison between the story of Jacob in the Old Testament becomes Israel, and the prodigal son. He's written an entire book on the prodigal son, basically. There's so much laden into this thing that we have just absolutely missed. And so we're going to kind of dig into that onion today. The problem with our biblical understanding, our exploration of Scripture, is that we become satisfied with the layer we're on. We grab the truth out of that. It's helpful. It's handy. That's good. God, and we just can't ever do that. I'm convinced that if we had Jesus wept as the only passage of Scripture, we have the shortest verse in the Bible, that if we spent time praying over that, meditating over that, and studying that in context, that we would probably never plumb the depth of it in our entire lifetime. The Word of God is alive. It is living, dynamic, and to become complacent with it is a travesty, if not a sin. So we're going back to Luke chapter 15 this week. I have yet to find a Bible that gives this portion of the chapter a heading that I like. And if I could put a heading in, I'm not sure what I would do. I think I would probably entitle this The Parable of the Compassionate Father. But it's also the parable of the older brother. So it could be the parable of 2 lost sons, or there's a whole lot of different ways you can do it because it's dealing with so much. So in order to try to get you out of here before 12:30, I'm going to talk fast and cut down on the chit-chat. But as soon as we say prodigal son, many of us hear that, think, a check, got it, loving father, disrespectful, younger son, goes off the deep end, yada, yada, yada. And I've been there, I've done that, got the t-shirt, don't need to go back. Not so much. It's very basic things that we have missed in this, and so we're just going to jump into it. So I'm asking you today just to forget what you know about this amazing parable and just listen with fresh ears to a familiar story for the first time again, okay? Can you do that with me? Can you just peel back 2 or 3 layers of this onion, dig a little deeper into what Jesus was trying to teach? The story, the layers of this story that we're going to look at today, the 3 layers that we're going to peel back, are dealing with honor-shame culture, which it doesn't exist in our country. America has never been really an honor-shame culture. There was a pretty good period there in the probably 40s and 50s where we motivated with guilt pretty well. But to do things that bring honor and to avoid things that bring shame to you or your family, not really where we live. There are a lot of cultures today in the world where this is very prevalent, very real, and it's a very powerful cultural motivator, and the biblical world was one of those cultures where honor shame is a big deal. The other second element that we're going to look at is the individualist culture versus the collectivist culture. America is a nation of individuals. Our motto is many into one, but we think of that, many individuals into one nation of many individuals. Everything we do on an individualistic basis, and it's what's good for me and what I like to do and what's fun, and even in our families, a lot of times we're still looking out for number one more than we're caring for our spouses or our kids or that kind of a thing. We are very, very individualistic in our worldview, whereas the world of the Bible is extremely, excessively, if it's possible, collectivistic in their nature, in their culture. They were far more concerned about the community than just the family or just the individual. And so this is another huge element of this story. And the third element that we're going to consider with this is the patriarchal worldview. Now, we have patriarchal language in the United States, and a lot of people don't like that anymore, that we have patriarchal words, and so we have Congress that are praying to a man and a woman at the end of at the end of prayers, to try to balance our patriarchal language, which don't get me started on the stupidity of that one. But patriarchal culture is a culture that's built around this collectivist culture that has at the top of a family grouping, a community grouping, a patriarch. And their role in that family is to make sure that everybody else is taken care of. And so if someone is marginalized, someone is indentured into slavery, somebody loses part of the family farm, it was the patriarch's responsibility to go and take whatever resources they had at their disposal to bring back that marginalized person, to buy them out of indenture, to repurchase the ground so that it would be returned to the collective, to the community. And this is huge in this story. So the final thing that we're going to really kind of top it all off with is that this is one parable. Luke 15 is one parable. It's one parable told three different ways. It all has exactly the same instructional point. And as you look at it, even in the English, you'll see it. We just don't stop to think about it. We think the Bible is a series of short stories. And you go from Genesis to Esther and to Jeremiah and to Luke, and you're dealing with four separate different kinds of short stories. And it's not. This book is written very intentionally, and Jesus was super intentional in the way he taught, masterfully intentional. Proof to me that he's God because of the way he pulls stuff together that in a more Old Testament literate culture they saw that we miss. So if you have your Bibles, Luke 15, beginning with verse 1, we get the why of the parable. The tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. And somehow this is a bad thing, because this made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. You know what? And so, as a result, Jesus told them what? This story, singular. He tells it three different ways, trying to get it hammered in. So we know that a man had 100 sheep, and one of them wandered off, and he left the 99 alone in the open field and went to search out for the one that was lost. No, you wouldn't. That thing's already wolf food. No reasonable shepherd does that. You take care of the 99. But he doesn't. He goes off and he finds that sheep and he brings it home and he said, look, I found the lost sheep. Rejoice with me. Calls his friend together and they celebrate. Parable number 2. Or suppose, here's a different way to look at this. A woman had 10 coins. and she lost one. Somebody thinks she has a hole in her purse or something like that. I think it's the Middle Easterners had a headpiece that women would wear, that virgin women would wear, and they had 10 coins on them. And if they were caught being promiscuous, they would remove a coin as a public demonstration that they were not virtuous. And I think that's what this is. It may just be that, things are tight and she's lost 10% of her wealth. But she sweeps her entire house searching for the coin, and when at last she finds it, she calls her friends and they come in and she says, "Rejoice with me. I have found the lost coin." And then he tells a third. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now, before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land where he wasted all his money in extravagant living, wild living. Doesn't give us any details other than it was extravagant. So, he got a new Porsche, that was carpeted or on the outside or something, just extravagant stuff that's over the top. And he blows through his money. Go figure. And then about this time, his money ran out. A great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. This is plan A. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him out into his field to feed pigs. So his predicament, he's broke, he's starving. He gets a farmer. He knows farming. He gets a farmer to hire him, but the guy sends him out to take care of pigs. Now, there's no way an Orthodox Jewish boy knows anything about the animal husbandry of pigs, I'm telling you. And to boot, now, he is inadvertently a co-conspirator in the worship of Zeus, because this was their sacrificial animal on that side of the lake. These are the ones that, Jesus let the demons go into, and so this is just a horrible situation for any Orthodox Jewish kid to be in. And it continues on that he became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding to the pigs looked good to him, but no one would give him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have enough and to spare, enough food and to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So when he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son.'" And stops there. It's an interesting difference between the first resolution and what he actually said, and there's a purpose for that. We'll talk about it. But his father said to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. Kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found." So the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard the music and dancing at the house. And he asked one of his servants, "What's going on?" "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father's killed the fattened calf, and we are celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, "All these years I have slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. All this time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. When this son of yours," not when my brother comes home, "when this son of yours," I love that. We do that in parenting, don't we? "Honey, your daughter is acting up," like you had nothing to do with it. That's a sermon for another time. This son of yours came back after squandering your money on prostitutes. Now, this kid knows what the boy was doing, right? Because, no, he's just reading into the story. It said extravagant living. It didn't say, debauchery. Squandering your money on prostitutes. You celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, look, son, you've always stayed with me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead, and he's come back to life. He was lost, and now he's found. One parable told 3 different ways. We get the part that when the younger son asks to have his portion of the estate, that's a shameful thing. We get that. The boy is basically looking at his dad saying, I wish you were dead. I can't wait for you to die. He's maybe not old, maybe not sick, and the boy feels his wild oats years fleeting away, and he wants what he wants, and he wants it now so he can enjoy it when he can enjoy it. But we get that's not a good thing, that's shameful, a shameful way to act. What we miss is that for the father to do it was shameful. For the father to acquiesce and divide the estate was shameful to the father. And yet, the father in this parable is willing to shame himself for the son. And he does it again and again. And so we have this culture where everybody in the village is going to know what's happened, because what happened? The boy got his portion of the estate. What's his portion? The dad didn't go over and sit down at his desk and open a big drawer and pull out the big commercial checkbook and write him a check so he could go down to the bank and cash it. They were a farming family. The older brother, was out in the fields working. They have a farm. They have land. And so the younger son would receive 1/3 of the acres. The older son would receive 2/3 of the acres. You can't put 500 acres in your pocket and ride off to the far country. He had to cash it out. He had to sell whatever the assets were. He's in a hurry to get gone, because it says that after a few days, he packed up and left. So he sold this thing probably at rock bottom price. First offer he got, he jumped on and cashed it out and sold it so that he could get on the road. And for the father to allow that kind of thing to happen was shameful. Shameful. We see the story is dealing with the father and his 2 sons. But what we miss is the idea that many of these small Galilean communities were composed largely of extended family. The patriarch was probably not just the patriarch of his 2 boys and whatever daughters-in-law and grandkids, but probably the patriarch of the community. This is the way they banded together. Capernaum is probably the biggest of the communities there around the Sea of Galilee, other than maybe Tiberias, but where Jesus is ministered in Chorazim and Bethsaida and Capernaum. Those cities were small towns where most of those folks were related to one another. They were, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, that kind of a thing. It was all, it was all family there, and so when the younger son, when Prodigal is taking resources out of his community and wasting them, he's taking part of their cropland. And if he sells that outside the community, then that's acreage they can't use. And so that means there's going to be less food. And so we see that it's not just an inheritance that he is wasting, but he is also wasting his labor. Now we have 1 fewer men to work the field and to clear the rocks and to pull the weeds and to sow the seed. We've got less manpower. And then to boot, if he goes off and stays off, we have lost his progeny. We have lost his offspring. So this community will be smaller in the next generation. And so he is damaging, by this one exit, he is damaging his community in a variety of different ways. And so this community is going to be hurt. So there's a reason why this behavior is unacceptable. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of pretty much unpardonable sins in Jewish culture, and one of those is to leave the community and marry a Gentile, because that probably means you're not coming back. The second one, and the one that this parable is couched in, I believe, is to lose one's inheritance to a Gentile. If you take the resources out of your community and go into a Gentile area and lose your money there, then those resources can never be recovered. And so this was huge in their mind. And so if and when you decided to return home, you're coming home with your Gentile wife, or you're coming home as he does, barefoot, ragged, filthy, broke, after squandering the inheritance on extravagant living, when you got to town, the elders of that community would greet you. And they would do basically conduct a trial. And the trial was to investigate what you did with the money. And when it's determined that you have lost that money, you didn't invest it somewhere and it's going to come due. You bought government bonds or something, and it's going to take 20 years for them to mature, but you wasted that money and it's not coming home, then they would have what is called kazaza. Kazaza. And kazaza was basically, if you think of it as a trial, a hearing, where the elders of the community would hear what you did and how you handled it all, and then they would consult, and if they deemed that you had squandered the community's resources, they would take a jar, they would fill it with grain, and they would smash it on the ground and pronounce kazaza. You are cut off from the community. You are no longer welcome here. Scholars disagree on family, but it probably cut you off from family as well. You are on your own. Don't come back. You left once, you can leave again, and this time you're doing it broke and filthy and sandalless. Hit the road, Jack. You're not welcome here. And this is huge in a culture that's built on community. Reading Jesus Through Western Eyes book, one of the authors talks about when he was a missionary in Indonesia. He said Indonesia is very close collectivist culture. And one of the fearful things is to be outside the collective. And he had a friend that had a house on a 3-mile stretch of white sand beach on an island. And his neighbor also had the next 3 miles of white sand beach and had a house built on it too. And he was invited by the first gentleman to go and spend some time at the lake or the oceanfront house, and he did. And he said, I could open up the window of my room and touch the neighbor's house. Now these guys own 6 miles of beach. And they built their houses close enough together that they could open up the window and hand one another a cup of coffee or a cup of sugar or an egg or whatever And he asked the guy, he said, why didn't you build this 2 miles farther on down the beach? And in horror, the guy looked at him and says, because then we would be alone. That's not vacation. That's terrible, to be alone. So to be cut off from this community, to be sent out into the world alone, never being able to return, is a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. Kazaza was a thing of great fear. So as a result of this impending disaster, that if the boy comes home, the now retired father, he has stepped away from it. He's passed it on to his sons. He spends his days praying for the boy and watching. I imagine that it was a rooftop perch. You have to get up some elevation to be able to see outside of these. A lot of times these villages had walls around them. The streets were very narrow. The houses were all wonky and built real close together. So you had to be somewhere where you had some elevation to see. And day in and day out, he would watch that road for that familiar form to show up. Because if the boy reached the village, kazaza would happen. And the father couldn't come to the hearing. He had no voice in the matter at all. Once the kazaza kicked in, it was the boy and the village elders. And so the only way to prevent that was to catch him before he got to town. So while he was still a long way off, the father recognizes that familiar walk, because probably nothing else about the boy was familiar anymore. Because the boy's only hope, the father understood the boy's only hope was for the father to reach him before he reaches the community. If he gets home, I don't have any voice in this. I have no way to defend him, no way to forgive him, no way to restore him. So as the unrepentant prodigal comes into the sight, the father, filled with compassion, runs to meet him, falls on his neck, kisses him. Here's why I believe he was unrepentant. In his first, the first thing he does is that when he runs out of money, he gets a job farming, which is something he knew. He knew how to farm. Didn't plan on the pig part, but he knew how to farm. He went to something that was familiar. When that wasn't working, he went to plan B. And plan B was to go home and to say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as an indentured, a hired servant. Let me pay off my debt. A way to fix his problem. Now, the reason that I believe that is because if you go back to Exodus and you start reading through the 10 plagues, how many times does Pharaoh tell Moses, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Please make this plague stop. Make the frogs go away. Okay, when do you want the frogs to go away? Tomorrow. Because I like sleeping with the frogs. One more night with the frogs. You know, I want to have frogs in my Cheerios for breakfast in the morning. Then you can get rid of the frogs. Well, I don't understand Pharaoh at all. But what he says, as soon as the Jewish audience heard the words, I have sinned against heaven and against you, they knew he was not repentant. Because that's what Pharaoh kept saying. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. It's simply a way out of his predicament. How many of us scheme and plan and plot and try to figure out ways out of our predicament? That's exactly what he's doing. He's doing the natural human thing. But when he gets there and he sees town, and there's that prick in the heart of being home. And then he sees his father. And it says that he ran. And the word here that is used, the same word that Paul uses for running an Olympic race. This old man, this dad, hikes up his dress, and as fast as he can run in sandals and a dress, he got to that boy because he had to prevent kazaza. This was do or die. He had to reach the boy before the boy reached town. And when the boy saw, because in the honor-shame culture of the Jewish world, it was shameful for an adult man to run for any reason. So he shames himself again to rescue the boy. And I think when the boy saw the depth of his father's love, dress hiked up, running breakneck or nothing for that kid before he could get to town. I think he knew what was waiting. I think he was thinking he could charm his way through it like he had everything else in life. But his heart was broken to see his father shame himself to get to him. And he falls on him and he kisses him. And the boy, because the boy changes his statement. He said, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. I'm not asking for a fix. I'm just confessing what I have done. There's a change. The father forgives and reinstates the boy. When the father does that outside the walls of the city, then the city elders had no voice in the matter. They couldn't change. They could not overrule what the father had done. So when he pardons him and he forgives him, kazaza cannot happen. The boy repents when the father runs, and the father then calls to a servant. Now, some commentators say, well, they must be in town by now because the servants, they wouldn't run with the father. Yes, they would. Those servants would go wherever the father went. Those household servants would go with him. And so he says, quick, go back to the house, get the best robe we've got, get sandals for his bare feet, and get him a signet ring, restore him, and kill the fattened calf. Now, we hit another cultural element here, and we don't have time to go deep into it, but there is a Middle Eastern tradition that's still active today. Millennia it's gone on in the Middle East. It's called a sulha. And it is a reconciliation feast. And what happens is if you do something that is harmful to another family, such that it could result in a blood feud, then a mediator can arrange a sulha between the injured parties to reconcile them to one another. The example that Ray Vanderlaan uses in one of his videos is there was a Jewish settler a number of years ago by the name of Emir. If you know anything about Israel, in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip, there are Jewish settlements. They're not supposed to be there. They're illegal by Israeli law to be there, but there are Jews who say, we will maintain a presence. This is traditional Jewish land, and it is ours, and we will maintain a Jewish presence despite the fact that it's illegal and it's a brutal, hard life. They did. And this young settler was driving through the West Bank in a torrential rainstorm. He made a wrong turn into a village and there struck and killed with his car a 13-year-old Palestinian boy. And the people came out. They did not want war to start, so they shuffled him back into his car and said, go home, get out of here before anything worse happens. And he couldn't live with himself. And so he contacted a local Arab Christian pastor who organized a sulha between the boy's family and Emir, the Jewish settler. And when they came together, the thing that happens first is for the person who created the harm, who did the injury, to stand up and make a full confession, to take ownership of what they had done. And he said, I was driving here in the West Bank. I made a wrong turn. It was a torrential rainstorm. I didn't see your son, and I struck him and killed him. It was my fault. He offered them money. They said, they don't want your money. The father couldn't even stay in the room. He would come in and go out and come in and go out. And the grandfather, the patriarch of the family, headed the sulha. And at the point that Emir has made his confession, made no excuses, taken full ownership, tried to make some sort of compensation, the grandfather stands up with a cup of coffee and he offers it to Emir, and Emir takes a drink, and the grandfather takes a drink, and he looks him in the eye and says, we will speak of this no longer. From now on, you are my grandson. Sulha, where there was adversarial situation, there now is peace. Folks, that is the 23rd Psalm. He makes a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He's not protecting us from our enemies. He is reconciling us. It's the Lord's Supper. Take this cup, drink it with me, and we will remember your sins no more. This feast that they sit down with the fattened calf, I'm convinced is sulha. It's a reconciliation between the father who has been shamed and offended and his son who has finally come home. But the older brother coming in from work, who's now the family patriarch, he has taken the position. The father divided his estate. The older brother got his 2/3. The younger brother got his 1/3. The older brother's now in charge. He is the patriarch. It was his job to go and find the prodigal. It's his job to go and reconcile that, to do whatever it takes to bring that back to the community and restore him. Not only does he not do what his patriarchal responsibility was to do, but he was angry when the boy does come home. He gets angry and pouts over it. Folks, now here's the one that'll ring your bell. We are the older brother. Who was he telling the story about? The religious leaders who were upset with sinners who were coming to God. That's us. Folks, God was willing to shame himself. One, by leaving heaven and taking on human flesh. Folks, that is a reduction in pay grade like you can't imagine. There are orders of angels that were created for the sole purpose of praising his name 24/7, 365, if such a thing as that existed in heaven. And he left that behind. He didn't see it as robbery, as something that was being taken away from him, but he took the omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving, all-ever-present power of God and crammed it into a human body and came and walked among his creation. And not only did he do that and shame himself in the process, he allowed himself to be crucified naked on a cross. Shame that even we can understand. He shamed himself twice to bring us home. And folks, as the older brother, we have been given a double portion of the father's assets to get the job done. That's the whole reason that nobody complained about the older son getting more than everybody else got, because his responsibility was to take care of everybody else. God has blessed us extremely. How are we using the resources that he's blessed us with to redeem the marginalized, to bring home the estranged ones? How do we treat them when they walk in the building? We are the older brothers. It is our job to go and to tell and compel and to restore the fallen. And you say, well, that's not much fun, and I've never really had a party. Well, that's your own fault, folks. Who owned the goat? At that point in the story, who owns the goats? The older brother. If he wasn't having a party, it's his own fault, folks. If you're not having fun doing the job that God has given you to do, it's your own fault. He's come to give us life to the full, abundant life. So if you're not enjoying it, it's not God's fault. It's probably we're miserable because we're not doing what we were put here to do. Now, I want to take this because of Father's Day message. I want to take it to the dads for a second. Men, God is our example of how to be a dad. He's the greatest dad in the galaxy. He understands what a father is supposed to do, and he does it. He swallowed his pride and took on human flesh. He paid a debt that wasn't his, so that a debt that was impossible for us to pay could be paid. He is not prideful. He is not arrogant. He doesn't say, oh, look what you've done. After what you've done, I could never forgive you. He never says that. He's come to separate us from our sins as far as the east is from the west. He's come to give us a home, an eternal home that he is preparing for us to dwell in. He goes the second mile, the third mile, the 100th mile, the millionth mile. And bringing home the bacon, fellas, really doesn't live up to his example. My dad was a good dad. He was a bit of a workaholic. He took vacation to paint the house, and we got a vacation with him. And, you know, he wanted to give his family more than what he had growing up, and he did that. He made sure that we had an opportunity to go to college, and he was a good man. He worked long hours and was not always there for things that were important to some of us. And he wasn't a perfect dad, but he was a great dad. But God is our example. My example for a father is not my father, but my Father. And that bar is extremely high. I can't let myself off the hook because my dad was a workaholic, then I can justify my own neglect of my kids or my wife. You may never be the greatest dad in the galaxy like he is, but you are the only one in the world who can be the greatest dad to your kids. Folks, as fathers, we are given a wife and kids, and you are the only man in the world who can be a husband to your wife and a father to your children. Nobody else can do that job. Those are ours by commitment and by blessing of God. And we delegate that, we relegate that to other people, or just don't let it get done because we're busy bringing home the bacon, or we're tired after bringing home the bacon. And we justify our lack of involvement in our kids' life because we work hard to give them a certain lifestyle. And folks, I guarantee your kids would rather have less stuff if it means they get more of you. Selfishness, I believe, is destroying marriages and destroying families in our country at an alarming rate. We date selfishly, we marry selfishly, and that's a sermon for another day. But selfishness is a killer of relationships. When I'm more concerned about me and my wants and what I get out of it than we are about pouring into our wives, our families, then we've crossed a line there that's going to destroy it. This three-part parable teaches us the central truth that lost things don't find themselves. Lost sheep don't know how to get home. They're not even sure how they got lost. Just a mouthful of grass at a time, they wander away. A lost coin has no cognizance of the fact that it's even lost. And it needs a finder to sweep the house from stem to stern to find it and then rejoice. And the lost son can only come home so far, and then has to be found by the Father in order to be restored to his sonship. Lost things can't find themselves. As the older brothers, it is our biblical obligation to scour the highways and the byways for the lost things of this world and compel them to come in. He's given us a double portion of the blessing to get the job done. Maybe it's time that we become more proactive dads. Quit waiting for mom to take care of it. You know, Dad, can I? Oh, wait till your mom gets home. Ask her. You know, Dad, could you take me? No, I'm busy right now. Go ask your mom if she can do it. Dad, can I watch this? I don't know. Talk to your mom. You know, how many times? How many times do we delegate off to the mom something we don't want to mess with? And it tells our kids they're not important to us. Maybe it's time that we start seeking to reclaim that which we have lost, church. That we need to go out and find those marginalized people, those people who've been indentured to sin, people who have lost their way and lost their standing. And maybe it's your own son or daughter or a grandson or granddaughter. Maybe we need to go and reconcile with that one and bring them home. Even though we may not agree with what they've done or what they're doing, it's not too late to reach out to them and restore them, folks. As long as they're alive and you're alive, don't wait to do it at a cemetery. This father was willing to do whatever it took to get that son back into the village. And it's never too late to become the father or the grandfather that your family needs you to be. Let's pray.